Hello, I'm your host, Susan Regan for Connecticut Valley Views. And our guest today is Michelle Cruz. She is Connecticut's state victim advocate. Welcome, Michelle. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Good morning.
Tell me a little bit about your background, how you got this job. I think you started in November 2007, is that correct?
That's
correct. You were appointed to the job. Was this always been kind of a career path for you? Is this what you've been interested in, helping people?
My career path has always been about helping victims of crime. Mm-hmm. And I began as a lawyer, as an assistant district attorney up in Massachusetts. I worked in 2 different offices. In the last 3 years, I specialized in domestic violence, prosecutions, sex assault, and also child abuse cases. And so when I saw the posting, it really kind of fit into all the areas that I'm interested in: legislation, education, victims' constitutional and statutory rights. So it was a nice combination of all the things that I'm really passionate about. So I applied, was interviewed, and here I am. When these things come into your office, are they generally speaking, is it a direct complaint from a victim? Is it through law enforcement, or does it come from several different directions? But what's mainly the thrust of where these things originate from, requests for assistance from your department? It's usually, the majority of our complaints are directly from crime victims. So a crime victim could call up and say, I'm a victim, I went to the police, they won't take my report. Or
why would that be?
Well, sometimes sometimes it's an issue of whether or not the crime is really recognized in the way that the victim is presenting it. Sometimes there's just issues with training. It could be a myriad of issues.
Like I was just yelling at my husband and we were having an argument and I called the police and they didn't respond. That kind of thing? Or?
A lot of ours were, when that issue comes up, a lot of times it's either domestic violence, harassment, or stalking. Because sometimes if you don't look at the whole picture, the one event, let's say, my ex-boyfriend's following me.
Right.
It seems innocuous sometimes.
Right, and so, they don't want to come until something's actually happened.
Yeah, so sometimes it's hard to really, have the police understand that this is a crime, that you have to look at the entire relationship to really understand the stalking, the harassment, or whatever the issue is. So we'll help the victim and, kind of present that to the police, work with the police to understand, what the victim's trying to complain about. A victim could call about, let's say they were in court, their case was resolved, and they didn't get to make an impact statement or reach out.
What's an impact statement?
During plea and sentencing of an offender in court, the victim's constitutionally permitted to give an impact statement. And usually that has to do with how the crime impacted them, the victim, and what they want to see happen, whether it's, usually when you ask, what do you want to see happen, a victim's automatically going to say, I'd like them to go to jail.
Yes.
But there's a whole lot of other options, such as counseling, substance abuse treatment, or education, anger management, batterers program. There's a whole list of options that the victim could say in court that they'd like to see happen. It is one of the 2 opportunities that the victim can actually participate in what's happening with the criminal case. Sometimes those cases are resolved without the victim having that input in front of the court. And when that happens, we'll meet with the prosecutor, talk to the victim, kind of find out what happened, and see if there's a way to have those victims...
Kind of meet halfway with what they would like and what would be appropriate for the person who committed the, let's call it, crime.
Well, usually if the case is done, the victim can't undo that sentence, which is the law here. But sometimes we can communicate the victim's frustrations with the prosecutor, see how to prevent it from happening in the future, and make sure the victim's voice is heard with the prosecutor, and that they understand why the victim was upset. And if there are any other issues that are out there, say the victim had out-of-pocket expenses, restitution, and that wasn't ordered, we can follow up with the prosecutor, see if we can bring the case back in.
Had to go to the doctor for something or whatever.
And we can see if we can bring the case back in to get a restitution order or some other order that's needed and get the victim's needs met that way.
Do you see the courts moving these things through at a fairly good pace, or does it seem like the issue happened in November and it's not until next spring that you get to go to court? Do you think our courts are working well?
I think
timely manner?
I think there's a lot of pressure on the courts to resolve cases, And I think there's also, I know that there's issues with, budget reductions, making sure that the courts are staffed in a way that makes sense, and that also fits within the budget. Most criminal cases, you're not going to see a conclusion on a small matter up to a year, year and a half. In a sex assault, it could take 3 years.
Wow.
Dr. Pettit's case is on the 4th
very
year.
ongoing, yes.
And so these cases, some of the cases just take a long time. And it's frustrating for the victim to have to kind of wade through that. I find that it's best at the beginning of the criminal matter to explain to the victim, this case is probably going to take 2 years. So the victim knows on the outset, wow, and can kind of know what's going to be coming down the pike.
Do you find ever that the victim goes back to a situation? Let's say something's resolved, and then a year later, and you hear from that same person again, and it turns out they decided to go back with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever it was who was the original perpetrator of the issue. Do you find that people get drawn back in?
I definitely, more as a prosecutor, I would see that. At arraignment, the victim may be on board. And then later in the prosecution, the victim wouldn't want to go forward. I think that's part of the process. I think
where they drop the charges, you mean? Where they say, I've decided
Yeah, they don't want to go forward anymore. And that happens, I think, for a number of reasons. With domestic violence, often the victim, basically the victim is moving their trust from this relationship and trying to personally manage it to a criminal justice system, which is completely out of their control. At least that's how they feel.
Correct.
And being able to trust that system to keep them safe is sometimes terrifying. And there's also maybe some pressure from the offender, maybe the family, might be financial pressure.
I was going to say fear has a lot to do with it, because the kind of thing where if it's a boyfriend or husband and says to the woman, if you ever tell anybody, and then of course then she does tell somebody, so now he's really mad. Now there's a fear factor there, even though you now have law on your side, or at least overlooking the situation. There's still that fear.
And you have to be able to...
Because he has friends.
Exactly, and you have to be able to trust the system is going to do what it's supposed to keep you safe. And I think that's a very scary... It's walking into the unknown for the victim.
Does the system keep you safe?
I think it can,
okay.
To a certain degree. Any victim that's out there who's thinking about leaving or, in the process in the criminal court, the number one question is, do you have a safety plan? What is your safety plan? And do you have a safety plan if things change, a plan B, a plan C? Because that's really the key to keeping victims safe. The criminal justice system is one piece. The safety plan is the entire piece, from the victim's personal safety, the law enforcement piece, the court piece, the advocate, the whole piece. So it's really, that would be the one thing. If they don't know what a safety plan is,
then you have to educate them on
exactly
on that. All right, I'm going to ask you one other thing, because I think when we watch the media, when we watch programs on TV, we watch melodramas of all kinds and CSI and so forth. Obviously, they skew it to have people watch and make it as dramatic as it is. But let's say in the case of a rape victim, let's just take it through. Woman calls on the phone, hysterical, I've been raped, whatever, police are called in, perhaps your department is called, whatever. They come in, the woman obviously there's been some sort of whatever, maybe her clothes are torn, and it's a very violent scene that you come upon, the man's not there. Now let's take us through what happens to that woman, because they make it look as though she's a victim a second time around. She has to go and she has to have pictures taken and so forth and so on. What happens to that rape victim from that point on? What actually happens?
It really depends. It depends. In Connecticut, what happens is if the victim reports and goes to the hospital, it's the victim's choice whether or not to call the police.
Okay.
The victim can go to the hospital. We have SANE nurses now.
Isn't 911 going to get the police, though? Isn't that?
But it depends. Sometimes the victim will go directly to the hospital.
Oh, I see. Drive.
Sometimes the victim will call the police.
Or whatever. Okay.
And so if they go to the hospital, they have a window of opportunity to get the sex assault kit if they choose. They'll have a specialized nurse in, I think, a majority of our hospitals now. Not all of them have it. They'll have a specialized nurse that will be familiar with the rape collection evidence, and then it's the victim's choice if they want to pursue the police.
I see. Okay.
The kit is kept for a certain period of time. I want to say 60 days, but don't quote me on that,
Okay.
but I am here saying that.
Right.
But there's a certain opportunity where the police can get involved, but it's the victim's choice. If the victim goes to the police are involved, and then again, if the victim wants to get the rape kit, they can go through with that.
So there's actually a choice here. There's no demonstrative activity by the police that you must do this.
The police may take the victim to get the rape kit, but the victim can always say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to go forward.
I can opt out.
But
I just want to report I've been raped, but I
Yeah.
don't want to give you any evidence? Is that?
Your victim could do that. What would happen is the police still have to investigate. When a crime is brought to their front door, they have to do an investigation. Then what happens is the police will do their investigation. If they believe they have probable cause, they'll fill out a warrant application. They'll provide it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor will review it. If they believe that they have enough evidence, they'll sign it. That's then sent over to a judge. If the judge sees there's enough probable cause, they sign it, and then we're off to the arrest.
Okay.
Or if it's clear at the scene and there's, they come upon a sex assault,
Right.
the police can arrest right then. But traditionally, there's the warrant process. Once the arrest is made, the biggest misnomer in our system is that a victim will report when the case is in court, they'll get a phone call from the court. That doesn't happen unless it's a homicide. What happens is the victim actually has to take a step, write a letter to the court saying, I want to be involved in the process. Here's my information, how to get a hold of me, and the letter has to go to the prosecutor. Unless that happens, you're not really reserving your rights to participate in the system.
Yeah, I'm going to say you're not there to give your statements or anything else. So there is cooperation required by the victim in order to have their say in court. Otherwise, the whole thing sort of continues on more or less without you.
But I think there's also, in Massachusetts, for example, when there's a crime and there's an arraignment, the victim will get a phone call at arraignment, regardless of whether or not they've told anybody they want to be involved. If they say at that point, listen, I don't want to talk to you, leave me alone, they won't probably call again. But here, you actually have to tell the court, tell the prosecutor, I want to be involved, I want to give an impact statement, however you want to be involved. So that you have to actually opt into the system.
Well, it's been a very interesting time talking to you. I hope we've shed some light, certainly, on people who are victims or people who are aware of people who are victims. We encourage people that they can call the department, and we'd like to give your website so that they can take a look at it, get some information, and certainly call your office if necessary. That website is www.ct.gov/OVA. I think I've got it right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Well, I appreciate it, Michelle. It's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you for taking the time. And I'm sure that we appreciate very much all that you've done for the community and what you will be doing going forward.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And for our viewers, you can see all of our programs on our website at www.ctvalleyviews.com. Send me your comments and emails to ConnecticutValleyViews@cox.net. This is Susan Regan, thanking you for joining me in bringing proof to the people.
Our thanks to Windsor Federal Savings for making this program possible. Neighbors helping neighbors since 1936.